What I'd like to start off with, one, that this has it has Greek in it, not has geek. So there might be portions that you won't understand, but please let me know if you don't. And before I get there, I'd like to start off with a couple of cartoons where somebody comes and tells God, saying that the human genome code has been unraveled, and he says, damn hackers, now I have to change the password, right? Then there's the next one saying, and this is something you can all use, especially your kids can. When somebody asks, why are you so obnoxious, you can say, it's hereditary, or it's from my genes. And then the third is, things like, do these genes make me fat? And these are all relevant questions, and these are really something that actually make you fat. There are genes for obesity and so on. So anyway, how many of you have seen Gattaca? All right. I hope many years ago or a few days ago. But what I'm going to do today is, even if you have, I'm going to show you a little trailer for that.
In the not too distant future, our DNA will determine everything about us. A minute drop of blood, saliva.
So anyway, so just to give a little background on the movie, I think this was done in like the 80s or early 80s when there was no human genome actually that had come out. But when you think about it, a lot of the science fiction actually comes to reality. So anything that you've thought about as a child is probably already coming true. So what you saw in the movie was that a little drop of saliva, a little drop of blood, all of that can determine where you can work, what you can do, and so on. While we've not really gone that far, what we have come to is that we can find out whether what sort of genes are responsible for certain types of traits, and what sort of genes will sort of allow you to find out what sort of diseases and so on are there. So anyway, we'll get to a little bit more of it towards in my presentation. And just to set the record straight, I have no elephants in my closet. I tried to find out about the fifth elephant, but anyway, before that, I just wanted to introduce what we do as a company. And so if you just want to give a brief two-line summary, we are a molecular diagnostic company. And what we are doing is we are a company for people who are proactive about their health. And our products provides insights into your genetic basis about ourselves. So these could include diseases, traits, inherited conditions, how your drugs respond, and so on. And by combining genetic reports as well as a health history with a counseling session, we are able to actually get actionable steps for people to be able to say how do you lead a more healthier life. So with that pitch, let me move to the presentation, which is how does big data actually power personalized medicine. So all of you I know have seen a lot of technical presentations, have seen a lot of information, but I think this would be much more of an application of what you have been doing, and I'll show you some examples of where a lot of the Hadoops and others have also been used in the personalized space, but not in too much of detail. So I think first I'd like to start off, I'm sure you've seen the first numbers slide already in terms of the big data growth, and I won't go into details about that. But if I look at what is there in terms of the actual healthcare data, that itself is fairly large. But what is more exciting is not the exact numbers at this point, but the fact that if you look at where it will grow from 2012 to 2050, it will grow by 50 times, and that is massive. When you look at the size of a particular genome, we look at the size of one genome, that's about a 3.2 GB, right? So it's fairly big. When we look at this, how this data is actually structured, when you look at the healthcare data, only 20% of that is structured. And a lot of that has to do with how doctors function, how hospitals function, and how everything else is organized. And while a lot of it is becoming more structured, we still have to deal with a lot of that. So what sort of data is healthcare generating? I think we are generating a lot of stuff about ourselves, right? We're generating stuff about personal medical records, which include a lot of scribblings, things like that, a lot of things that you would not have collected yourself. There's radiology images, there are genetic data, there's submission data, and so on. So all this data, if you take all of that together, it is getting much more, it's getting a little structured, but there's still a lot to be done over here. So the type of data types that we deal with at MapMyGenome and at Ossimum are basically genomic data. So when you look at it, I have a little river which has a lot of flowing pieces of data in it, and these are the kind of genomic data that we deal with, right? So there are disease samples, there's microarray data, there is a chips data, there's exome, methylation data, and so on. So a lot of these data types are currently there, which is flowing, it's inundating everybody. Everybody who's doing any research in anything is probably already generating some type of data that with some abbreviation that you've not heard of. So yes, we stole some terms, right? The chip is not what you're thinking about, and neither is the chip on chip. But anyway, but the idea is that when you look at it, I'll give you some examples of what big data has inspired a company like ours, that is MapMyGenome. So we take the first example. This is BioExpress database, which is a database that we had at Osimo. It was a database which has about 22,000 samples. Right? It took 9 years to make. And just to give you an example of what the price of a microarray chip was just less than 10 years ago, it used to be about $12,000. So the amount of money that went into making something like this was about $150 million over a 9-year period. What we had to do to be able to collect this sort of data was that you had to look at about 90 different tissue accrual sites from all over the US and other places. We collected from them, we got a network of clinicians, we got a lot of IRB approvals, etc. in place. And after getting all of that, they all went through they were all run on an Affymetrix microarray chip. Right? Now it seems like a very, very simple process, relatively simple process in terms of the actual technical piece that we are doing. However, you can see that, the amount of money, but the amount of QC and the amount of information that you need to run that sort of experiment was fairly humongous. So what were we talking about? What were the kind of things, data types that we were looking at? We are looking at things like normal tissue, which would mean any healthy individual tissue. You look at CNS disorders, CVS disorders, inflammation, metabolic disease, oncology, and so on. These are that is the kind of information that was collected. Now each data point, let's say we collected it from a person A, would have a lot of information. There would be about 1,400 fields for each of these things. They would cover things like demographics, your health risk factors, like height, weight, BMI, allergies, diet, supplements, OBGYN history, and so on. You look at your other primary disease, your treatment history, your family history, your diagnostic tests. So this is all about one particular patient. You're getting enough information, which includes histopathology, images, and so on. So there is lots of image types. There is physical, like writing. There is a lot of treatment history. There's diagnostic tests. So you have a lot of different types of information that goes across all of this. Then we had to structure it into a way that would still be easy for us to be able to then get information out of it. And then there was more data, right? So from here and there, we went everywhere. So we said, what do you do when you have this big database, but you also now have a lot more going on in terms of the kind of data that you're generating, whether it is an exome data or some data or the other. So every kind of research that is going on in this field today will not just be about microarray data, although that is a great piece of information that you're getting. So we said, what do we actually do to be able to say if somebody is doing research and you really want to find out by taking all the little data types from all over the place, what is it that you have to do? So we then said we would create something that will allow us to put all of this together. It was very easy to say, but to implement this with all the little pieces is not an easy task to do, right? So what we said was, you have things like your DNA, RNA, and protein. You have questions that you have about these elements. But you want to be able to, when you're trying to get an insight into this, you're trying to be able to do multiple different things. So you're trying to find out, for instance, how do you get information from various databases that are already in existence? Then you're saying, how do I take the scripts that are running, not just internally, but also look at people who have come up with scripts and algorithms outside. Then you look at different things, like you ask questions. You do a lot of querying on these data sets. Now, these data sets might not be simple data sets. And so you ultimately then connect it with other things to get the information that you have. So this would be an example of the kind of things that you would do, right? This is your sample and your experimental data. You take your control vocabulary over different data sets. You then do a web-based querying and reporting. So these are just the different kinds of pieces of what we are currently doing. Any questions on these? Anybody would like to know a lot of detail on how this is actually done? Okay, so if you see this third one over here, this one says gene to annotation. So you're looking at a specific gene, you're looking at connecting it with all the different kinds of pieces that are there. So that sounds confusing if you're just looking at it for the first time. So we said, okay, how do I actually say, let's say, take one small example. So you want to find insights into canceromics by looking at multiple types of data types that you have. Right? So what is the type of data that you're trying to find information from? So first, let's say the type of data that you're looking at is NGS data. So you're looking at the whole exome, you're looking at the whole genome, or you're looking at a transcriptome. Right? The second is you're looking at things like your gene expression data, which basically tells you what is the sort of genes that will express given at a certain time. Then you have RT-PCR data. Then you have chromatin immunoprecipitation data. This is your interaction of a DNA and a protein. Then you have SNP data and so on. So these are just some examples of the type of data types that you will have to be able to then come up with something in the end. So first we do some discrete data analysis, which means we take each of these little pieces of data that we got, create a pipeline to be able to then say, for each of these specific data types, what do I do with them, right? So you would have specific types of algorithms that you would then run them across, and then you would get some information from them. So for instance, if you take something like a DNS-seq, and the type of algorithms or others you do as BFAST or others, you are trying to find SNPs and indels. Then you take something like an RNA-seq, you will use something like an R package, you find novel targets or expression. And this is just some examples. There are many types of different data types that we actually then run this data analysis on. Now, after you've done all these little pieces of data analysis for each of them, you then say, how do I put all of this together? Right? So you've started with a little small set. Now you start coming up with the actual cool integrated analysis, saying, how do I actually put all of this together and say, compare epigenetic patterns with gene expression, right? So now you have taken one set, you've taken another, you've put them together. Or you say, how do I take something that is a wild type, a mutant type, and find what is there in between? So those are the sort of things that you're now doing. So I suppose you got the point, right? Yeah. So I think there are two types of things that we have. At least one is the first, for most people, it is the problem is in getting data from point A to point B, right? Because you're collecting all of it, then you are trying to do the computing. So the computing is one part of it. The biggest challenge, at least in the genomics world today, is that when we get a lot of data from, let's say, somebody else, from one of the big pharma companies, when that data travels, there is no real. I think right now the biggest problem we have is the bandwidth problem. We still get hard disks in many cases. So even though there is cloud, there's a lot of this thing. That is one piece that is there. The second piece is saying, how do I actually turn it around faster? In terms of, we are currently, the techniques that you're using are still very slow in terms of being able to get the turnaround faster because of the amount of data that you're dealing with. Right? So both these problems are there today. But in terms of the algorithm and all, those are now a relatively easier piece of the problem. But I think it is more to do with can we actually get it faster in terms of speed to be able to turn around. So for instance, when we had the BioExpress database that I talked about, every time you make a run to be able to give it to a customer, because you're finding a slicing and dicing that data, it can almost take up to a day to actually turn that data around. Any other questions? Yeah. I'm getting there.
time, resource, and expertise. Like, what does it take for me in India to set up a machine which can take saliva and generate?
So I think the generating part is easy now. The interpretation is what is difficult, and I'll get to that. I'll get to that part of it. So this was more about saying, how do you actually take research data, be able to get some novel information, find something new about a particular gene or things like that. That's part A, right? That's your research piece of the puzzle. So I said from research, then how do you get to consumer, which is what you have just asked, which is saying how do I actually get my saliva? How do you get started with something like what we do at Math, right? So for that, I'm saying that, before I get there, I'll give a little Akashvani that in 2050, genomics won't be as cool as it is today, but it will become the foundation of everything that is there in medicine or in healthcare. So I think the reason I say that is that if you look at what somebody's imagined for 2050 to be, and I think it'll probably be a little more complex than that, but what you would see over here, and I won't go into too much of detail, but if you see that there's a personal health informatics piece, and if you look at through this thing, you can see that there is the genome, that's your SNP, your epigenetics, your expression data, and so on. So all of that becomes piece of what your ultimate health information is going to be all about, right? And how you're going to interact with, whether it's your information gadgets, whether it is going to be your collaborators and other things. So what you will ultimately need would ultimately be that you have something in your, probably encoded within you, but you will have all that information already stored, and you will be able to have, enough information that you can then make a lot of these decisions altogether, including things like what you are doing with wearables and other things, which I think ultimately will become something that we can put inside our bodies, right? But then these are the sort of outcomes that you want to see from self-expression, enhancement ultimately towards cure. So anyway, just as a stopgap, say Hari Om Genome instead of saying just that. So anyway, so where personalized medicine is today, and I'm coming to what you were just looking at. So we have something like a genome Patri style prediction. What does that mean? It means that you want to find out cool stuff about you. You want to find out if, like I asked in the beginning, whether you have some problem in drinking caffeine, or whether you are an addict when it comes to cigarettes, whether you are an alcoholic, or whether you are a sprinter or you have a long endurance and so on. So these are cool things about ourselves that we can find out based on our genetic profile. The next is things like, when I want to find out whether you are predisposed to a particular disease, most people will be worried, saying, I don't want to know before it happens. The question is that, whether you want to know or don't want to know, doesn't stop you from actually having a predisposition. We are all programmed to be fatal. We'll ultimately have some disease or the other, or we'll die in a plane crash or something like that. But anyway, the reality is that, what you're trying to do is not to say that you will die of a particular disease, but what you're trying to find out is saying, if I'm more likely to be at risk for something, then do I want to know that, right? And if I know that, what does it help me? And it only helps me if I can actually make changes to that and not otherwise, right? If somebody just told me that, you will ultimately, I read your palm and it tells me that, in 5 years, this is what's going to happen to you. I don't think that's something that's exciting to me. But if someone told me that, you are at risk for diabetes, so do you want to actually change that? So if you look at it from a probabilistic point of view, you're saying 30% of this risk is coming from genetics, but 70% of this risk is coming from not genetic factors, right? And I think people miss that point, that it's not a pure genetics piece only. It is genetics, and it's lots of other things. When it comes to cancer, I think again it's the same thing. You have a very small risk that's coming from cancer, but if you have that mutation, for instance, in lung cancer, and you were smoking, then you have screwed yourself, because 0.5 of that risk is coming from smoking. Your genetics is causing a smaller portion of it. So you've basically made yourself much more open towards getting that disease on, right? So the good news is that this is only about risk. It is not prediction. It is not a diagnosis. It's just saying you are likely to be at risk. So in many ways, it is about saying, It is not that people didn't go to the sea, or it is not that people don't go out if it is raining. But if it is raining and you go with an umbrella, you're more likely to not get wet. Right? Similarly, if you are going to the sea and if you had a compass and someone told you there's a storm there, you probably won't go there. So it's about that. It's about being able to say, can I understand what is there? Some things will happen. And what things happen, you want to make sure that that remains a constant. But what you want to make the changes for is the things that you can make a change. So in these cases, I think a lesson in probability probably helps, because ultimately it is about probability. So this is the sort of thing that you will see. I'm trying to see if I can zoom this in. But anyway, so this is just an example of the sort of thing that you will see, right? What are the traits that you will have? Are you likely to be at high risk for a particular type of a trait, your cholesterol, blood pressure, and so on? And then you have things like your diseases. When you look at cardiovascular diseases, there is your risk, and then there is an average person's risk. The average person's risk is calculated based on a population group, and that's another place where you will see you are actually, and I'll give an example of how some of these people, how it is calculated, right? So if you say 20% of Indians will have diabetes, that's the risk that 1 out of 5 Indians will get diabetes. But if you have a risk which will say you are at 40% versus the other, you have a little bit higher risk than the rest versus something that's lower than that. And then you are looking at things like saying, how do I look at a particular drug? Will a drug actually work for me or won't work for me? So for some people, certain types of drugs work wonders. For others, they don't, for the same sort of disease. So that's the sort of thing that allows you to be able to say, do I have this right genotype where this drug is going to work for me? It's not going to work for me. Will it be toxic for me? Will it not be toxic for me? And so on. So that's another sort of piece of information that you can currently get. So that is one part of what is there today. And the next piece of things that you can do from a personalized medicine point of view is to find out information about babies. How many of you have heard about PGD? Nobody. All right, great. So this is what this PGD, right? You're essentially creating, in an ideal world, it essentially means that, let's say somebody is trying to have a baby. You get a lot of different, you get fertility drugs, you get multiple eggs. And what you're doing in that is you are making sure that you can genetically screen for the right kind of babies. Now, currently it is being done for specific types of diseases that are there. But in an ideal world, you can imagine that you will ultimately be able to come up with the perfect baby when you can extrapolate. The other things would be things like your neonatal diagnosis. I think most of you who've had a baby would have gone through possibly done some sort of an analysis on some of the diseases that are there. The other is also about taking fetal cells and being able to come up with some diagnosis about potential diseases. What we are currently seeing are mostly diseases which are 100%, where you have a very high risk of either getting a Down syndrome or others. But you can essentially look at more than 200 or so of these kind of diseases when you look at fetal cells itself. Okay. Then we are talking about drugs, right? So I'm not talking about the ones that many of us might think about, but efficacy of common drugs like your clopidogrel, your warfarins, and others. And you're looking at adverse reaction to drug. I think I got people's attention. Then there's other cool stuff happening, right? And we've realized that this is one of the things that seems to be much more important than the kind of things we do is paternity testing, where people want to find out whether a baby belongs to the parents that they claim it is. We can also have where orphans can find family relations. You can find what they're closest to. You can find out about things about what their family history is. And the other thing is forensics at the place of crime, right? You can say that if there's a crime happening at this point, I think most samples end up going to CDFD because you're trying to say you have to file an FIR. Once you file it, your DNA sample is sent there for analysis. So those are the sort of things that can happen. Then is the other cool thing, which is ancestry. All of us are curious to see where are we from? Where did we come from? right? Did we all started maybe in Africa, but what is the path that our ancestors took? So there are two things. One is, how many of you know what is the difference between your maternal lineage and your paternal lineage? So you're saying that, if I'm looking at the maternal lineage, you look at the mitochondrial cells, versus you look at something like the Y chromosome, you're looking at the whole paternal lineage. So you can find out very interesting stories about that. I don't have too much time to talk about that, but that is one area which is still not completely clear at this point, at least for the Indian ancestry. But this is an area which I think has a lot of application going forward, at least, and it has a lot of higher curiosity factor than others. Then this is an example of a world map, right? How did we traverse from which part of the universe to which part? And you can see these are the sort of paths that everybody has taken to be able to get to that. So here comes something that you're all familiar with. We're saying that when you take something like an ancestry.com, which is one of the largest ancestry websites, what do? They looked at 30,000 historical content collection. Right? They looked at a lot of this information. They looked at a lot of historical information that is very difficult to read. They looked at 13 billion records and images, and the amount of data that they are looking at to be able to go through all the calculations and everything else is around 10 petabytes. So that's sort of the amount of information you need to take to be able to run and get that sort of information that you are looking at. Anyway, so then somebody asked, if all I need to do is to be able to get a machine and run it, what's the big deal, right? So what we are saying is that we are doing something that we call as our snappy stuff. So it's our secret sauce that's going through a pattern. But it basically means, in a nutshell, it means that we went through a lot of records. We went through looking at many different databases of different kinds for about 2 years, looking at a lot of different starting points of looking at reading research articles and so on. But we also had an advantage that we had this big database, which is what we were ultimately heading towards, even though the data types were different. And so therefore, you take all of that, you put in an amazing algorithm, which essentially takes use of the facts that you are, for each population type, you have a specific prevalence ratio, you have a certain types of odds ratio of getting the disease, and you come up with Mr. Snappy's prediction or Miss Snappy's prediction. Because the chief scientist there is a lady. So I just want to point that out. So why Snappy, right? How many of you know what is a SNP? One. Only one. Okay. So a SNP is essentially a single nucleotide polymorphism, where that's what we are currently looking at. And I'll tell you the reason why we are only looking at SNPs at this point. So what we are saying is that you're looking at a SNP which has one change in your A, C, T, G letters, but it has to be found, that change or that variation should be found in at least 1% of the population that you're studying, otherwise it doesn't qualify to be a SNP, right? And the reason for taking something like this is that you are essentially looking at large studies that are done over 4,000, 5,000 people. You're looking at putting all these studies, seeing if those are actually making sense from multiple studies, and then being able to take that information. So SNP is one piece of the puzzle. When you ultimately go, the whole genome is a much larger data set. So once we do that, then the computing requirements become much higher. So this is what you do, right? You take a piece of saliva or you take blood, you extract your DNA, you then run it through a process of genotyping, all of that. And then ultimately you get your unit, but then you get raw data. Right? The raw data is then put in through an algorithm that will ultimately give you the predictive scores, and then you get the report. So that's but once you get the score, that's not enough, because when you look at just a genotype of any individual, that is one piece. Understanding their health history is the second piece. And being able to give an action or an actual plan after that will be the third piece. So where is sequencing today? I think, just to give an example, I think we have we started to defy Moore's law in around 2007. So you can see that the cost of sequencing the human genome has fallen dramatically since, and this is not very long ago. This is 2001 and this is 2013. So from about 100 million to $500,000, right? So that's the sort of costs that have gone down. The other thing is also that's the cost per genome. So you can see that's Moore's law, and 2007 was when we decided to define. There's also been very rapid changes in terms of how much data you can generate from all of that. And this shows how the whole future has moved from saying, we started off from when many of our friends would spend their nights in the lab running gels, to today saying that you're moving towards very massively parallel sequencing, and we're moving towards a single molecule. So I think in just a span of 10 years, what we have seen is huge growth in terms of the amount of data you can collect about yourself. But you are also being able to say that the cost of that is reducing so rapidly that it starts to make sense. So anyway, any questions so far?
Are you seeing any so for risk factors between different ethnicities in India? Are you seeing that some diseases are much more prevalent in some ethnicities, like Tay-Sachs for European populations?
Absolutely. I think that if you have seen that a lot of hospitals already know that, or in certain cases. Right? So if, for instance, in certain drugs, they know that it doesn't work on a certain type of community.
And are there some interesting patterns which
we are, but I'm saying, see, the data is still not enough. So for instance, I think there is no big, data that's still, currently there. So I think we might have one of the largest at this point, but it's still not large enough for me to make those specific inferences on that. But that's the plan. That ultimately, if you're collecting all this data, you will be able to get insights.
This might be a very naive question. What you said that one genome to process it, it takes about 3.2 GB of data. So why should it take so much data to process one genome, and how many genomes are we looking at? Can you drill down from one cell to possibly the DNA and then walk us through? Because my idea of the whole
So I'll tell you what was the challenge in the past. It was more a technology challenge, right? You were reading a very small amount of information. So you were reading, let's say 500 base pair, 500 base pair, 500 base pair, and then you're putting them together, right? So it was not that the whole, ultimate product is too big. The problem was, how do you read all of them? Then how do you cluster all of them? Then how do you make sure you've taken strands of these information? You take those, you start putting them together, right? Are these the right strands? So those are the sort of challenges that we went through. It was not so much that the end product is that problematic, but I think that's the hope, that ultimately technology will come to a point where sequencing all of it at once would be easy. It was primarily that was a challenge, and every time you're looking at it, technology is changing so that it allows you to read either larger ones, or it allows you to be able to assemble. So the interpretation of that becomes then easier. So those, I think, are at least a bigger challenge than other things. But otherwise, it's not, when you think about it from a completely layman's perspective, you're saying, what's a big deal, right? I mean, 3.2 GB is not, 3.2 billion base pairs, not that huge a number, at least when you're used to dealing with big data. But that is not where it is. You have to make sure that you get the pieces of data that you're getting is of the right magnitude. So we are still taking a few hours to get the data in today.
Yeah. Okay, I'm Arvind. I think you answered the question. See, in genomic, the SNP and all that 1% is because of a lot of errors in batch runs of a matrix, two color, etc. So I wanted to know if you have noticed anything unusual about the Indian population, because a lot of research and also the tissues you mentioned were not of the Indian race. So that was the question.
So I have noticed some things, but they are not statistically significant yet. So it is not good for me to make them as a public announcement. So although I love to see all of that, but it was things, things that maybe got something of my. This thing is to say, how do we look at specific areas within India? Because that's the research we haven't done yet. Right? I think, understanding disease in a generalized Indian way is still information is there. But I think there's a lot of differences between all of that.
Yeah. So you need a lot more data collection. And how
That's the big part. That's where the big challenge is, right? You need to have, for each disease, if you have a minimum of, say, 10,000 data points, then you can, and you have clinical history to make a real judgment, right? Otherwise, it is still conjecture. So I think that's the thing that we are looking at, right? We're getting all this information, but we have our measures of saying what constitutes a good, statistically significant data point that we can then use. So you have to constantly be updating that information in terms of saying, one is that they are published sources of information. But the second is saying, how do you take that, look at it from a specific, population point of view and then be able to analyze that. So I think that's something that is where expertise in terms of understanding that lies from.
Hi Anu, I have a question. It's actually a two-part question. One is, you initially showed a slide where you talked about certain traits what we see about the capital addiction. So the question is slightly light. So, would I be able to find out whether my daughter is a shopaholic or not?
Doctor is a?
Shopaholic or not? So,
I think that would be a good thing. I think I will take all the shopaholics first and do the analysis before we get to that.
The question on a serious
So you can see things like your addiction genes and all are there. So for instance, when you look at nicotine dependence, right, there is a gene where because you have that mutation, it takes you longer to feel the pleasure. So either you don't smoke at all, or if you smoke a lot. Right? So those sort of things you can do. I don't know if the shopaholic thing has been done. It's
Okay.
not in our database yet.
So the question on the serious note is, would we be able to, or whether you have been doing anything on the behavioral aspect of humans?
We have, and I think we do a lot of things on some of these behavioral markers, but what we have done is to supplement the genetic information with the cognitive information. So we have a product which is called WebNeuro, and that is a product actually by another company called Brain Resource. What we do is when it comes to behavioral aspects, you cannot take only genetics and say I'm done. Right? So even though you might find certain things that are fairly genetic in nature, you will still have to supplement it something with saying that, can I do a cognitive test and then be able to put those pieces together. And I think that's something we are doing. So we are doing that with the certain hospitals where we are collecting the behavioral, the cognitive factors with the genetic factors. So I guess as we enter a brave new world, I think all the forces are in the world are not as powerful as an idea whose time has come. So I think that time is that idea is genomics and its time has come.
Okay, this is the last question.
So I was asked to make sure that you know that there is a chat group there that you should be aware of. sb.lk/has geek.
I know, very interesting lecture and completely new. I think I'm not familiar with this area at all. But just, I think if you look at automation that has happened for areas like cancer, you have expert systems which are actually trying to diagnose, and they are just giving, assistance in terms of, what could be possible causes of cancer, which are also from genome sequencing, etc. You mentioned that there's a lot of human intervention. You said there is a lot of structured data and unstructured data which you put together. There is the history and so on, and then you kind of come to a sort of conclusion. So there are two questions. One is that when you're looking at expert systems, there's a lot of localized data, which may not be related to, the generic problem for human race as a whole, or, larger population outside places where hospitals collect data for their cancer patients or their. So you also have a localized sort of set of data here, which may not give you very deep insights into what are causes for, various disorders. The other is where do you see that, by 2050 or 2020, automation playing a bigger role because of rules. So you're having, rule-based systems coming in and telling you what are the automatic causes for various things that you see. So I mean, basically, what I want to know is, when you go forward, how do you see the trend moving for genome analytics?
I think very valid questions in terms of what is there. So I think where we are today, we don't have. We are dealing with a lot of unstructured data, but that's all getting digitized. Right? So there are, I think, especially in the US and others, where Obamacare and others, you're forced to sort of move into medical records. Similarly, I think even in India, I'm very, very pleased to see there are companies like Evolco and others who are creating these medical records for all of us. Right? So there is one piece of the puzzle that they are solving, and so once I think right now we are still dealing with problems of proper data quality, right? Because you don't have the data. When you go to a hospital, you still don't give enough information. So when, for instance, when we collect data, we collect a lot of health history information. So we ask people a lot about their fathers, grandfathers, and all of that. But ideally, if that was something that was already in a system, your life becomes a lot simpler, right? Because if you can automate all of that, then your decision making is a lot easier. So that is one piece. That there is the component of saying, how do I collect information from various different sources? If that collection piece is all done, automation becomes easier. The second question is that once you have enough data points, so for instance, I think when the Human Genome Project also was done, you had samples from all over the world, but they were still not very large samples. At that point, the problem was saying, okay, 99.9% all of us are alike, right? At least can I get the base sequence? So we got that. Then we are saying, we have done enough studies in different parts of the world that tells us, this is what is there. Now you go to further refinement of saying it's not just the fact that I'm Indian, but because now you will have many more diverse set of ancestries coming in. People will marry between different regions and so on. You will find a very different gene pool. But all of that, I think, makes easier once you have enough information and it's structured, it's put in a place, and then you can create the system. So when you are talking about companies that are looking at diagnosis in cancer, I think that's probably the most advanced at this point. And the reason for that is simple. I mean, I think one, there's enough funding for companies to do something like that. And the second is that people are more interested in giving that amount of information because they know they can save somebody's life. Right? So I think ultimately you will probably not get clear information about every disease, but for certain types of diseases, I think that will become more clear. So you have companies like Foundation and others who are doing prediction of unknown cancer types. Right? So you go in there, you give a piece of tissue, they will tell you what your likely type of cancer is and so on. And there is a lot of funding for companies like that. But ultimately, I agree, what will happen is that you will have enough data sets, you will have enough points of system where it will become easier for anybody to do it. Today the challenge is, we work with a lot of hospitals. And the challenge today is that when you go to a hospital, half the time you're working with some people who have this was not part of anything that they studied in their entire life. So it is very hard for you to expect them to know everything that is there versus somebody who has currently just done something like that. So you have to reach a stage where you have to give at least 5 to 10 years where that piece will get sorted out. And then I think everything else will. Unless we come up with a disruptive sort of technology that will say, none of this is needed, we can just sequence all of it, we will tell you what is the likely cause of it. So till then, I think it will still take some time because there's education, there's a lot of things that are there to reach that stage of decision making, but it will happen.
Okay, that's actually all the time that we have right now. If anybody has any additional questions, please go on sb.lk/hasgeek. You can continue to interact from there. Any questions that you guys have, feel free to put them up there. That's why we have it. We know that you all have burning questions and you want to keep asking, and we just unfortunately don't have the time for all of them. So please, once again, that's sb.lk/hasgeek.
All right, thank you, everybody.